Namaskar and welcome to Sansad Television. I am Vishal, Dahiya, and you're watching our show Perspective, where we bring you 360-degree holistic view of all the key issues and analyze their various aspects. Now, today we're going to talk about Prime Minister Narendra Modi's US visit and the bilateral meetings which he has held with several leaders there. In fact, Prime Minister Narendra Modi held bilateral meetings with his Japanese and Australian counterparts and US Vice President Kamala Harris on the second day of his visit to US and discussed a broad range of issues of bilateral, regional and global importance. In the bilateral meeting with Japanese PM Yoshihide, both the leaders reviewed the multifaceted relationships between the two countries and reaffirmed their commitment towards a free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific region. They also agreed to enhance bilateral security and defense cooperation, including in the areas of defense equipment and technologies. Prime Minister Modi highlighted the need to develop bilateral partnership in manufacturing, MSME and skill development in the bilateral meeting between PM Modi and Australian counterpart Scott Morrison. Both the leaders expressed satisfaction over regular high-level engagements between the two nations, including the recently held first India-Australia Foreign and Defence Ministers 2+2 dialogue. They also reviewed the comprehensive strategic partnership and resolved to continue close cooperation for mutual well-being and towards achieving their shared objective of an open, free, prosperous and rule-based Indo-Pacific region. Now, Prime Minister Modi also met US Vice President Kamala Harris, and both the leaders discussed the COVID-19 situation in their respective countries, including the ongoing efforts to contain the pandemic through expedited vaccination efforts and ensuring supply of critical medicines, therapeutics and healthcare equipments as well. They also acknowledged the importance of collaborative action on climate change and discussed areas of future collaboration, including on space cooperation and information technology. Now, Prime Minister Modi has also held first in-person bilateral summit meeting with US President Joe Biden, with both the leaders discussing how to enrich further the comprehensive strategic global partnership between the two nations. Now, in this show, for the next half an hour, we will discuss and analyze various aspects of India's bilateral relations with these three nations and try to understand some key issues such as how can India and Japan enhance their bilateral cooperation, the road ahead for India-Australia comprehensive strategic partnership, and also how do India and United States enrich their multifaceted ties. Also, we'll try and understand the roadmap for ensuring rule-based, open and free Indo-Pacific region and India's concerns on regional security and how these three nations look at those concerns. And for more on this, we're joined by three distinguished experts. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with Major General Dhruv Katoch is joining us. He's Director of India Foundation. We're also joined by former Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, and Yoshita Singh is also joining us. She's Chief Correspondent with PTI in New York. Welcome, all of you, to Sansad Television. Let me begin with you, Yoshita. Key takeaways, if we have to understand and we have to try and analyze the various aspects of bilateral relations India has with Japan, Australia and United States. There were 4 key meetings, including the ones with the Japanese and Australian counterparts of Prime Minister Modi, and 2 between Prime Minister Modi and US Vice President, and now between him and US President, the first in-person meeting. So what are the key issues there?
Right. Thank you for having me on the show. And clearly, it's a very, very action-packed day in Washington for India and also for Japan, for US and for Australia, because given the fact that this is the first in-person Quad meeting that will happen soon, the first bilateral meetings in person, face-to-face with US, with Australia and Japan after the pandemic. So clearly a lot has happened and a lot has to be discussed in these meetings. And we have to understand that these meetings are taking place against the backdrop of the situation in Afghanistan, which turned so much in these last few weeks, with the COVID pandemic still raging in many countries, the issue of vaccine inequity and the issue of access to vaccines and imports, and also the climate change aspect also, because we've heard both from President Biden also and from the other leaders as to how important the issue of climate change has become, given the recent floodings and the catastrophic climatic situation that we've seen. So it's a very important meeting between Prime Minister Modi and his various counterparts from around the world. Of course, the Quad relationship, the Indo-Pacific situation that you mentioned, the COVID pandemic, these will be the key takeaways that we hope to see from these meetings going forward, concrete outcomes, and also how these the nations can work together going forward on all these aspects and all these critical areas.
Okay. So there it is, a broad range of issues, General Katoch, as Yoshita is pointing out, and I was, as I was saying in my introduction earlier. Let's look at some common elements. There are some common elements as well among these, issues which we are looking at in terms of the discussion between the top leadership of India and these countries. And one of them is Indo-Pacific. That's a common thread with Japan, with Australia, and with the United States of America as well. And the Quad meeting, Quad leader summits is also going to take place. So how do you see this, particular issue moving ahead, the road ahead when we're talking about free, open, and rule-based Indo-Pacific region?
Thank you, Vishal. You see, the way I've looked at it is there were 4 key areas in which all the discussions have taken place. Earlier discussions also took place with the 5 top industrial leaders of the United States, and that encompassed a very wide range. So what we were really talking about was defense, security, economy, and technology. But coming down to your specific question, this is where the defense and security aspect comes in when we are looking at the Indo-Pacific, because all the countries are looking at one common threat which is emerging, China, which is expanding, China, which is becoming very aggressive in its behavior, both on our land borders and also in the South China Sea. So there is an element to see that, okay, how can we actually get onto a mechanism by which China will cease to be as aggressive as it is being now. And that is where the key takeaway, which Prime Minister Modi has continuously been saying when he enunciated the Sagheer doctrine. And that doctrine was exactly what you said, a free and open navigation in the Indo-Pacific region. Now, this is something which China doesn't want. China may talk about economy and about traveling freely, but the actions which China has taken in the South China Sea, by which it wants to control the entire area as its own private lake, now that is really where the problem is going to lie. And that has to be contained. So how that is to be contained, I think, will form a very important part, or would have already formed an important part of the discussion which the Prime Minister had with the Japanese Prime Minister and with the Australian Prime Minister, and also the discussion which he had with both the Vice President and the President of the United States.
Okay, indeed. So Indo-Pacific remains a very, very important issue for all these countries. And you mentioned China. There's been an interesting comment which is coming from China as well, where, just a short while ago. We'll go to that as well. But let me bring in Ambassador Wadhwa here as well. Ambassador Wadhwa, from your perspective, if you have to understand the common thread, one being Indo-Pacific, the other is obviously dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, the fallouts of this particular pandemic, ensuring sort of a robust supply chain for effective delivery of vaccine as well. All these 4 nations do have a lot of stake on that issue as well.
You're right, absolutely, because, when we had the summit in March, which was virtual, one of the key takeaways from that summit of the Quad was vaccine rollout for the Indo-Pacific. And of course, that's a venture which is a cooperative venture between all 4 Quad countries. So technology from the United States, which will go from Johnson & Johnson to biological E, and then funding from the Japanese into this venture, the distribution by Australia, and most importantly, the manufacture by India. Now, as far as India is concerned, that is, going to be one of those key takeaways, how much we've progressed since that last decision, whether all the ingredients are in place to roll out the vaccine for the Indo-Pacific in the next year. And if that works, then of course it's counted as a big success for the Quad. So that's one of the issues that would be right on top of the agenda as far as all Quad countries is concerned. But on the other hand, I think that's most important that there's an underlying security aspect, which we just discussed. In all this, I think it is also the underlying background of the Chinese making inroads in all these fields in the Indo-Pacific. And the Quad is there to counter that and to neutralize that and to put pressure on China to reduce its aggressive behavior.
Okay, indeed, and there will be a lot more clarity on what is the road ahead when the Quad leaders meet in that summit also. But, looking at the specifics, and I'll start with you, Yoshita, here. When we're talking about the bilateral cooperation or the bilateral relation, apart from these common elements vis-a-vis Indo-Pacific, security, defense, technology, and, the COVID pandemic, there are other key elements as well. For example, when we're talking about India-Japan relationship, there's a lot which is being done on MSMEs, on skill development, and various other aspects as well.
Yes. Sure, of course. And also, we also have to understand that these meetings that take place will also sort of, in a way, aim to set the path forward in a post-pandemic recovery world. And as we've heard, that no nation alone can either battle the pandemic or even emerge out from it. So there would be need for enhanced trade now, whether it's between India, Japan, India, Australia, and India, US, and other countries also, and to see as to how the countries can work together to ensure that the economic recovery happens together, the trade recovery happens together, and for that they would need cooperation, as you mentioned, in the MSMEs, in other areas also between the between countries, because I think the key focus now is how to emerge from the pandemic, to build back better, as we've heard, and also to build back greener, because in that sense the climate change aspect also comes in, to build back bluer also, given the climate change situation. So again, trade, the economic recovery, more bilateral ties, people-to-people exchanges as nations open up their borders to each other now after almost the 18 months of the pandemic. That aspect also, I think, will be discussed between countries. The vaccine certification, all these issues will have to be tackled on one-to-one basis between the countries. And I think the Quad and the bilateral summits have provided that platform and that background to take these issues forward.
Okay, Ambassador Wadhwa, similarly is the case with the India-Australia, bilateral ties. Apart from these common threads, there are key focus elements, and some of them have come out very clearly during the Foreign and Defense Ministers 2+2 dialogue, which has happened very recently.
Absolutely right. I think, and then the key underlying factor there is also security in the Indo-Pacific. Now, you know that we have progressed quite a bit as far as the Australia-India dialogue is concerned. The participation of Australia in Malabar is now a very firmly entrenched issue. Going forward, I do not think that Australia would be excluded anymore from those exercises. Mm-hmm. There's also the interoperability agreement, which has been signed between India and Australia last year, which has actually worked very well in terms of the recent Malabar exercises. Okay. And Australia has invited India to to participate in all the exercises that Australia is involved in. So going forward, we'll have a cooperation between all three wings of the armed forces. Okay. But underlying this relationship is also the economic relationship. Australia has been facing the brunt of Chinese aggression as far as the economic relationship is concerned. There have been sanctions and tariffs which have been imposed on Australians' exports into China. And Australia is looking for new opportunities, new markets. India is one such market. And that's why there is talk now of an FTA between SECA, which could be revived, a limited SECA, which could take place as early as December this year. And at the same time, India, Australia, and Japan are discussing the Resilient Supply Chains Initiative, which is also a very important, mechanism. Indeed. To make sure that the dependence on China is reduced.
Indeed, that is another very important factor there. General Katoch, you earlier mentioned, in your first response about the regional security issues as well, and there are some very valid concerns which India has raised time and again with the regional security issue, and the scenario has changed rapidly in the past month and a half as well. Now, this is a forum where a lot of opportunity for India to understand, not only put forth its concern, but also to understand what are these nations, trying to do about those concerns, and how do they view our concerns? What is your understanding of that?
One of the things post-Afghanistan, which in my view has come to light and which is going to become more visible every day, is the realization by the United States itself that it can no longer carry on a unilateral agenda, despite the fact that it is the only superpower today. And let us make no mistakes about it, there is one superpower, and that is the United States. But it would require the other regional powers also to act in concert to carry on an agenda for regional stability. Now, America can't do it alone, so I think India is going to be a very pivotal player.
Okay.
Now, India has also got its own security concerns because when the drawdown was taking place in Afghanistan, we had made it very clear to the Americans at that time that, listen, it is not going to suit our security interests. Well, that is exactly what happened. And today, with the American forces having withdrawn, I don't think it is suiting anybody's security interests, the instability which it has generated. But there's one factor which I have been consistently harping on, in my view. India is still fairly insulated from what is happening in Afghanistan. The fallout is actually going to take place on the regional players, that is on the Central Asian republics, on Iran, on Pakistan, and on China, despite the fact that China and Pakistan appear to be gloating today. The blowback is actually going to come on them.
Okay.
So for us, I think for India, our problems still remain with China on our northern borders and with China on specifically in the Indian Ocean region. So I think this is the time when we've got to ensure our own security architecture in the Indian Ocean with the help from the United States, Russia, and Australia. But with Australia and Japan and America, I think those three will be dealing with the South China Sea.
Okay.
India may not have that important a role to play there, but we will have a vital role to play in the Indian Ocean because that is our backyard.
Okay.
And combined together, I think we can keep the nations, the Indo-Pacific sea lanes, secure.
Okay, quite a lot of linkages there, as you're pointing out, General Katoch, vis-a-vis the regional security situation and the Indo-Pacific region and the issues involved there also. Mr. Wadhwa, let's now look at the India-US bilateral relationship, and that is now known as Global Strategic Comprehensive Partnership, something which both Prime Minister Modi and President Biden would have discussed how to enrich that. But during the meeting with Vice President Kamala Harris, there were some key issues which were discussed between both the leaders. One is about climate change, the other about dealing with the pandemic as well, and the other related aspects also. So how do you see this relationship, which has been a time-tested one, moving ahead from here onwards?
Well, the India-US relationship is now multifaceted. It's progressing, in leaps and bounds every year which passes by. One can see the progress which has been made. The Indian diaspora, which President Biden referred to today, is a moving force behind this relationship as well. On the defense side, there's been particular progress which has been made, which is very, very notable and very, very significant. But at the same time, I think if you look at the trade and investments between India and the United States, that's also a very strong, element of this relationship. So going forward, I think what India would need from the United States is not just a defense relationship, but a commitment from corporate America to invest into very important high technology, cutting edge areas which is very important for India to progress in the fields that it wants to. And that is also very essential for employment generation, for making sure that if we have to reach the goal of 5 trillion economy, that the manufacturing capacity of India is raised from 14 to 15% to about 25% of GDP. And for all this, America is a very important partner. I see a lot of progress being made. And as we mentioned earlier, in terms of vaccine production, America is the key where all the essential ingredients which will be supplied from the United States going forward for the Indian vaccination program will also become important for the whole world.
Okay. Yoshita, apart from strategic issues, defense and security cooperation, as Mr. Wadhwa is pointing out, it's when we look at the relationship between India and the United States, there are other key elements as well: trade, investment, technology, and a partnership on the related issues as well. So What are the expectations, and are both nations able to meet those expectations?
Well, clearly, I mean, there are more expectations now that both the US and India expect from each other going forward. And as you mentioned, trade, and as Ambassador Wadhwa also mentioned, trade is one aspect where there is scope for a lot more bilateral cooperation between India and the US. That has been an area where both the countries can explore more, can have more opportunities to work together, given the fact that defense, security, all that is there. And there is a strong cooperation in those areas already. But going forward, I think trade will be one of the key aspects. And I think Prime Minister Modi also mentioned that going forward in the next decade, trade between India and the US should be a focal point to enhance that cooperation. And we are seeing so many new technologies, the AI, whether it's drone, whether it's the artificial intelligence technology. Again, that is another aspect that has a lot of scope for improvement as far as bilateral cooperation is concerned. It's the future. It's where the future economy lies. It's
Indeed.
where cooperation can happen. And so I think this meeting, this bilateral meeting, the first in-person bilateral meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Biden will set forward the stage for enhancing trade, because that's one area, like I mentioned, where there's things are lacking and then there can be more cooperation. And I think also it will help in the post-pandemic recovery, like I mentioned before, because that's where the companies can invest in each other's each other's businesses. The U.S. companies investing in India, Indian companies coming here and generating jobs, economic growth. So I think that's what we will need to see going forward.
Indeed, and it's very much required there as well. You know, a post-pandemic economic recovery. Both these big economies, General Katoch, will have to work together. But looking at that new technology, issues, the emerging technologies, as both Mr. Wadhwa and Yoshita is also pointing out, it's not only from an economic point of view, but it also complements the strategic and security partnership between both the nations. Do you agree?
Actually, the new technology is the future. It is going to be the most important event which is going to take place over the next decade. And I don't think India should be left behind in this race. We are specifically talking about issues like quantum computing. We are talking about artificial intelligence. And these are going to be the drivers of everything else. So whoever takes the lead here is going to be one of the leaders in world dominance. Now, India, I think, cannot be left behind. And this is where I think we need to cooperate with the United States and with Japan specifically. We should also cooperate with Taiwan when we're looking at chip technology, with Australia. Each of them have got their strengths. India has got great strength as far as its manpower is concerned. Now, there is a convergence of interests. It is not that India is only going to be a receiver. We are leaders in space technology. We are leaders in missile technology. We can share. So it can be a very complementary arrangement, which now we can have with the other great powers. And I think it will be to the mutual benefit of all. And it will contribute to that wider aim of the Prime Minister, the Sagheer Doctrine, security and growth for all in the region. I think that is what we should be looking for. And technology will be the key driver to achieve that aim.
Okay, indeed, technology will be the key driver to achieve that aim, and new age technologies. Thank you so much, General Katoch, as well as Yoshita and Ambassador Wadhwa, for your views and inputs. So as our experts are pointing out, there are several key issues when we are looking at the bilateral relationship between India and Australia, India and Japan, and India and United States. Quite a lot of common elements as well when we are talking about the security and strategic and defense aspects, the regional security concerns which India has raised time and again. But trade, investment, emerging technologies, they remain the focus areas, specifically in the post-COVID pandemic world, where economic recovery is the key factor and the main target for all the nations. We'll come back again tomorrow with a different topic, and we'll talk about Prime Minister's address at the UNGA and obviously the Quad Leaders Summit also. Till then, keep watching Sansad Television. Thank you.